So,
Go ahead.
hello and welcome to another episode of Grow Free with Emma B podcast. Grow Free is all about transmuting fear and transforming trauma so that we can be free to align with our deep, wide, true, bright nature. And we do this through education, peer support, community events, gatherings, activities. And as I was talking to one of our members about earlier, through creating a playground, a safe playground for our members. This year, we're doing some really wonderful, experimental, playful things within our peer membership, from creating family ceremonies to creating our own earthly cosmic dances like the haka, but maybe with a bit of a different flavor, playing with voice and sound and having a lot of fun as we let our past experience unravel into more joyous nowness. Hurrah. It's been a long, intense process of healing and unraveling some of this. And there'll be more intensity, I'm sure, and a lot more fun. And one of the things that I'm most excited about this year, look at the cheesy grin on my face, is meeting and bringing, honestly, one of our most beloved members up to Aberdeenshire in person. I'm so excited to spend time with Jon up here, to welcoming into my home in real life, not through the screen, and just chatting. So yeah, Jon is coming to town. Jon is coming to town. Or more like, Jon is coming to our woods. Jon is coming to our woods. And he's coming to deliver 3 workshops up here in Aberdeenshire. Jon, I met you in 2020 during lockdown. I probably, if it wasn't for lockdown, we wouldn't have met. We were doing a children in permaculture training with Lucy Alderslow, who's someone else that I would really love to bring up for a workshop. And since then, we've had a number of really beautiful conversations, a couple that have been recorded for the podcast. The first time we met, I remember Lucy introducing you in that training, and there was a kind of palpable reverence in her voice. I think she said something like, yeah, this guy's really contributed a lot. And I didn't know, like, really what. I didn't know you from Adam at that point. But I really felt what she said. And I know she's not a gushy person. She's contributed an awful lot herself. She's created a sort of pedagogy and guide for working with children in permaculture. And I still didn't quite realize how much you'd done when you came along to that first session on trauma that I held, and I did my doodle sketch, and we chatted afterwards. And I still didn't really know, I guess, even how much you'd done when we had some of the intimate peer sessions that Georgia will remember, and we had, really honest conversations, and you never put on any masks, and you always turn up as a really grounded, down to earth, honest kind of guy. And I remember in that first podcast, one of your opening comments was, yeah, I'm just another guy. I'm just another bloke. I'm not sure what all this attention is about. I'm just another bloke. And I have actually found myself remarking or reflecting on that comment a few times, because you are another bloke, but you're not just another bloke. And I'm like, why? What is it? What is it about Jon that I find inspiring or attractive, or don't even know, okay, I'm going to say lovable. Like there's just something, there's such a lovely feeling that wells up inside me whenever we speak or whenever I think of you. And I've sort of wondered, oh, is it your presence, your softness, your insight? And it's the furthest I've got with it is I feel like you embody something that probably a lot of us really aspire to, a connection with the natural world, a joy, an appreciation. There's something in you that kind of bubbles over. And I think like the coming together of you and I to even have this conversation, to host a conversation like this around trauma, around reconnecting, is quite an interesting combination, that we come from kind of quite distinct experiences or perspectives, that where I grew up becoming completely disconnected from my body, disconnected from nature, really stuck in my mind. What I understand from the conversations we have is that you really grew up staying really quite deeply rooted in nature, in your love of it, spending time there in your body. I'll let you come in and speak to this in a minute, but that's the kind of sense I get from you. So I'll get us onto the thread or the topic of this podcast at some point. But to begin with, for the people here and the people listening, can you introduce yourself and just let us know a little bit about how you came to be so deeply rooted in nature, and how you came to be so deeply committed to sharing that with others, to supporting humanity to reconnect with nature, and where the kind of the avenue that I've known you to follow around trauma and recovery and prevention and healing has come in for you, and how you came to be here on a Tuesday evening with other people turning up to listen.
Thanks, Emma. Can you hear me all right? Because I'm getting a slight stuttery thing this end, and I know we've got a bit of an unstable internet connection this end. Is that okay?
I can hear you okay, yeah.
Great, super. I feel quite humbled by all that. Thank you. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? This thing. It's come full circle, because the person that sort of embodied everything I ever felt right from when I was inside the womb was Mum. That's my immediate direct line into feeling part and parcel of this incredible world that we live in. And I think it was Mum that really placed me, that fitted me with the natural world. It's interesting. I was just listening to a podcast tonight as I was coming down from home to my weekly 2 days to look after our grandson here in Bristol. And it was, for some of you probably will know about Krista Tippett and her On Being podcast that's been going on for, I think it's since 2004. And it's where I get a lot of inspiration. And she was interviewing, oh my brain, Janine, I've forgotten her second name, who's the biomimicry person, and reminding me. And I don't know whether it's with you, Emma, or whether it was with some other people, where I was actually saying the whole Western society's got this survival of the fittest all wrong. In fact, Darwin never said survival of the fittest. He said survival of the fit, meaning those who fit in to the community, that they are part and parcel of it. So if you're looking at it in ecological terms, the robin fits where it fits. The slug fits where it fits. We fit where we fit and where we feel most comfortable. That's where we thrive. That's where we fit. It's not the fittest, it's the fit. And I think Mum did that for me. I just felt I fitted, particularly with the Beechwoods in the Chiltern Hills in Oxfordshire, where I spent my first 13 years. And I never realized how powerful Mum was in all of that, right from when we were crawling, playing with my brother in amongst the bluebells, all the rest of it. Until this January, when Mum died on January the 14th. And in getting ready for her funeral, which took longer than we thought, but it was because she had to go for post-mortem for some reason, God knows why, but I uncovered she was a bit of a poet. She always did these rhyming couplets at Christmas for every one of her 9 grandchildren about their life the year before. So Mum had that in her. And I always saw her as the rhyming couplet person, but then uncovered all these journals that she'd had. I knew she kept journals, but I'd only read a couple, but never read all particularly one that she had at school, going from, I think she was 8 when she wrote the first poem that was in there, all the way through to her secondary school. And she'd got Keats, she'd got Joyce, she'd got Coleridge, she'd got Wordsworth, she'd got all the great nature poets from that time, but particularly, and this is where there's a big regret on mine, it was Jon Cree written out everywhere. Jon Cree is the nature poet of his time. He was the one who was, he came, for those that don't know, he came from Northamptonshire. He was working class, but he was very much of the natural world, and he was the great poet that tried to rally against the enclosures and all the rest of it that happened. And I never got to speak to Mum about that. And then all this other poetry that she wrote herself that was almost in the tradition of people like Mary Oliver, David White, and I never discovered it until afterwards. This is just one of the regrets, I guess, of not having found these out and talked to Mum about Jon Cree and the poets that inspire me today, which is very much similar to the poet, though she would never, I don't think she ever knew about Mary Oliver and David White, and particularly that poetry of trauma and connection. So that's a long way round. That's one of the main reasons I ended up with this gifted life in many ways, of feeling part and parcel of being part of the non-human. Right up to today, where we were out coppicing in the little wood that I'm helping with. I hesitate to say own. I'm there as a helper.
Yeah.
Well, even steward, I think that's got connotations, hasn't it? I always thought caretaker. Is caretaker a good one? No, helper.
Where you fit.
And there's something where I fit, and I'm being a helper in that coppicing and knowing that these complex interactions happening, that the hazel tree, which is here because it survived being mowed down by saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths, and then thrived from that, and everything that's interconnected with all of that. So it's that fit and that resonance with the human and the not more than human, feeling that those bigger feelings and bigger picture things that we, I think, realized during COVID more and more. Yeah. So
I love the way you framed that. It wasn't so long. No, it wasn't so long. And it's so beautiful, and it so fits with, I mean, the very foundational course of Grow Free that starts to inform people around trauma and then bring in practices and resources. The key practice and where the key influence around trauma is those early attachments, especially with the mother or a mother, and that's also our key resource is the internal modeling that we develop or then create for ourselves. That we speak about anyway in that course. So normally for these podcasts, I have a theme already in mind that we speak about, but for this one, I've got the workshops that you're running in mind. And what I'd love us to do during our conversation is to tease these workshops out and find some kind of a shared thread or key theme running through them. And I'd love our guests tonight, some live listeners, to help with this. So, guests, as you listen, please take notes, drop any notes or comments into the chat as you feel drawn to. Feel part of this. The only reason you're on mute is just for the recording quality. But pop your questions into the chat, pop a hand up, and we'll either weave you in as we're chatting, or there'll be space at the end, especially for questions. And you're welcome to put them in either in the chat or to ask live in person. The workshops, the title of the 3 workshops that Jon will be delivering while he's up here is, one is The Power of Connection, which is a weekend immersion. One is called Together in Nature, which is exploring nervous system attunement in nature for practitioners and peer supporters. And the third is Involving All, Evolving Play for practitioners, educators, and parents. And what I thought we'd do is start with a few key words or phrases from the outline of the workshops. So the first couple of phrases that comes to mind that, Jon, they won't be a clear question here, but maybe you could respond to the phrases and tell us what you were thinking.
Yeah.
I might have changed the wording a little bit, as is my wont often. But so the first couple of phrases: nature helps us to hold big feelings, share life experiences, reframe challenge and create solutions. We'll be working with the multi-sensory world of nature. So nature helps us to hold big feelings and share life experiences. Nature helps us to reframe, challenge, and create solutions. And working with the multi-sensory world of nature is key to what you've done throughout your lifetime and what you're training others to do around whether it's learning or healing work in nature. What do these phrases mean to you?
So the big feelings comes from, well, both personal interaction, but also I started off in my, if you like, professional life as a youth worker, and then ended up working with adolescents mostly, but actually with all ages, but predominantly adolescents who have been challenged severely by our society, and particularly our education system. And it never ceased to amaze me, even after some of them we'd worked with. So the last time when I was working for a local authority down here in Worcestershire, I was working with two lads, 2 years, 3 days a week, highly traumatized sort of backgrounds. One was completely dissociated from the world. He was just immersed 24/7 in computer games. The other was probably fighting at the special school he was at 12, 14 times a day, and they thought it would be a good idea to put these two together and come out with us, and it sort of worked. And just watching the former one suddenly, after about 8 weeks, open up and feel the exhilaration of swinging through trees. He walked with a hunch. He could hardly run because he'd just been sedentary for years. And it was the guy, Drew, who brought him out, who actually played a lot with him. We only had a few occasions where it got really tricky between the two over the 3 years. I had a really lovely teaching assistant working alongside, who was his one-to-one with us. But watching Ben, the first one, we'll call him Ben, just discovering swinging through trees and this exhilarating yelp of and it was a mixture of fear and ecstasy. It's a real mixture of fear and ecstasy. It is that sort of on the edge of that risky play where we are getting this huge adrenaline kick, this thrill, but at the same time there's a fear. And then watching that then manifest itself in this total immersion in two blue tits going in and out of a blue tit box, and this sudden awe. And it was big feelings. This is just in the one session where he suddenly opened up and we discovered what he needed in terms of swinging through trees. So that's just one example of just witnessing these big feelings. And then Drew, the other guy, we discovered he loved reptiles. And he would spend hours just next to a little viparium, which are just the corrugated iron stuff normally that you put down for grass snakes and things. And his sheer and this is joy, this was pure joy that he'd never really expressed. A lot of it was very edgy banter, quite streetwise words that we wouldn't repeat, but just holding either a newt or actually watching a grass snake and just seeing not so many words, but just the whole body in this just state of joy, which his one-to-one had never witnessed before, and that often happens with us. No, this is where I just feel gifted and honoured to have worked in the natural world alongside individuals that have just never really found themselves until they've got
What?
out there and been given the space, and just to be able to express those feelings they never really expressed before.
Yeah, it's what you're describing there sounds like. I remember Heidi, you describing a kind of almost just allowing a group of kids to behave in nature is a completely different thing than it being like in a classroom setting. And it almost sounds like what you're describing there is you didn't have to come up with any complicated solutions or structures or games. You allowed nature to connect with them, with those kids, and just giving them the time and
Yeah,
space to do so.
but there's also a resonance between us, me and them,
Uh-huh.
which is key. It's the resonance between the human beings within our little community as
So
well as
describe
connecting,
that. Can you describe
resonating with
that
them.
a little?
Um,
Can you?
it's hard. It's really hard to
It's
put into
non-verbal,
words.
isn't it? Yeah.
It's very non-verbal. It's being acceptant. Acceptance is such a big thing in all of this. And being alongside, I think those are two key things. Whenever people, and I don't know how many people have been teacher trained here. I went and did teacher training, but didn't finish it, and I've done youth work and all the rest of it. But the thing they should tell you, the first 5 minutes when you go into teacher training, whatever, is you have to love them. You might not like what behavior comes at you sometimes, but you have to love them. You have to accept almost unconditionally. And you're not finding answers. You're not here to find answers. You're here to be alongside, to explore, because there are no definite answers. And yet we want definites in our system, isn't it? It's interesting just listening this week to some head teachers who are riling against Ofsted now. And you've probably heard about what's been happening in England. And this teacher that committed, the head teacher committed suicide, but that everybody's rallying round saying Ofsted is not, this whole judgment thing and this certainty thing is just not real. It's not human. It's not the world.
And it's been expressed through the media like that.
And it's, yeah. There's something about us just accepting and being alongside, and trying to empathize with where the learners are coming from, and resonating. And there's just the resonating thing. I can only describe it, I guess, in Daniel Siegel's turn in terms of this interconnection that we have. And he talks about energy a lot. And there is a certain energy between us. There's an energy between us and trees. And we now know, looking at all the theta and the beta and the alpha waves that we emit that resonate with trees. It's not just a mycelium connection. It's not just that. That's sort of what's happening in these liminal spaces between beings. There's a certain energy and there's something about intention that goes in there. So yeah, what makes us click? And I think part of that is this whole non-judgmental thing, right
Non-judgment
from the word
provides
go.
safety, doesn't it? If it
Yeah,
feels safe to express the big feelings, because the big feelings need to be expressed. It's when we
totally.
stuff them down that they cause us problems, huh?
It is, and it's just I mean, for me, it's that whole mindfulness thing. This is where mindfulness comes in. It's where we can sit with an adder or whatever, being in that moment, in the here and now, where sometimes pain comes up, but we're in the here and now, and we're actually just focusing on our bodies right now and our feelings right now and our clicking in with whatever it is we are paying attention to. Um, and I think that's what the outdoor space gives us, and particularly nature, the natural world gives us. I'll never forget years and years ago I go to Guernsey regularly as and out doing all their outdoor training. And I just sent people off for sit spots. Some of you probably know it's a regular practice in the outdoors, just going off and sitting and just being in solitude, not alone, not lonely, but being alone with other things. Sent them all off, and these teachers came back and they all said, "Oh my God, that's what it's all about." And I turned to the outdoor education advisor, Darcy, and I said, "Darcy, what are they talking about?" He said, "I know exactly what you asked them." I said, "What do you mean?" Well, we've been doing the mindfulness for schools training for the last year, and for 4 of them, they got it for the first time. There's something about that going back to the multisensory thing, this subliminal multisensory input, particularly in a rich nature air place, where I was today, just the chiff chaffs have come in, the bird songs just gone bonkers too early. I mean, I don't know whether people have been out to listen to the dawn chorus. I don't know what it's like in
Yeah.
Scotland at the moment, but it's almost like Maytime.
Oh yeah.
It's
It's been
just
a concert, a
phenomenal.
show. Yeah.
Yeah, and then but it's really windy and the rain's coming down, and it's just this multi-sensory environment that you just takes a little bit of focus for you to shift that mind to the here and now. And it's just the place to be practicing mindfulness so that we can hopefully extend that into our every minute of our life in terms of
Yeah.
focusing attention.
It reminds me when you're speaking about that of the vision quest I did and the lead up to it, Georgia. You'll remember some of that. The sitting in nature and the quality. Yeah, the quality of presence that comes for me anyway outside. Whether it's through the groundedness of like physically connecting to the earth and how that draws me down from here into probably the whole body, and probably like you were speaking about the way the theta, beta, delta, I don't know which ones, but the waves of the different plants are emitting. And my connection with plants has really been ramping up this last year or so, where I feel a real ability to know a plant on a deep level, a consciousness level, like feeling the energy of that plant and what it's bringing, or how it's just being, and in a way that also for me, like inspiration and solutions come through in that kind of meditative space from nature, just observing the way branches move or the water's moving. It's like, oh, all these things that have been issues or problems or life's situations that get unraveled by the messages and the patterns that come. Does
Yeah,
anyone?
and it is keying into that patterning, isn't it? It is the oracle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
many portals in nature. Does
Mm.
anyone have any questions they'd like to come in with now? I've not got any in the chat or no hands up, but just a wee invitation. No. I'll. The conversation so far has kind of brought up two of the further phrases that we have. I think because we literally there were speaking about kind of theta, beta, physiology a little bit. If I go into that you've put in some of the wording for the workshops, some things like let's understand the neurobiology of healing. Another phrase was helping reframe situations and behaviors through the knowledge of mind body relationships through neurobiology. You've mentioned Dan Siegel there, and like what's his phrase? Is it interpersonal neurobiology?
Interpersonal neurobiology. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
this whole idea that we are more, we are connected. We are more than our mind is not just here. It is in our relationships. It is in our
Yeah.
environment. What do you mean, and how might we explore this kind of thing in a workshop?
So, a lot of this for me comes from the polyvagal theory, and I'm assuming because everybody's part of the Grow Free community here, you're all familiar with those workings of our autonomic nervous system.
I think most people will be familiar with it. There's no harm in doing a real brief summary. If
Okay, so Stephen Porges, I think he's just completely shifted the whole fight flight freeze because it's more than that. And then there's lots of other neuroscientists, neurobiologists that like Dan Siegel and Jaak Panksepp who've layered into this. Just looking at the workings of the brain, the interaction with the body, and how that interacts with the place. For me, it does link in with our vagus nerve. Resmaa Menakem calls it soul nerve, and I just find that such a better term because for me, our soul it's not in here. It's also out there, and it is our, if you like, our niche,
our
our
fit.
role in the world, our fit. What is it? Our fit. What is it? What qualities are we bringing to the world that makes us tick? And the soul nerve, the vagus nerve, this vagabond of the body that just roams everywhere and controls all our organs, our essential organs. It's this that I guess Stephen Porges has been looking into for years and years and years. And what's the role of this? It must be there's something more than just fight, flight, freeze. And he then brought in the whole social engagement system. And in some ways, I just feel this is crying out to be saying, then it's more than social engagement. This is just the world engagement system. There's an ecological engagement that happens as well as this social. Because as soon as we, as humans, we need other humans, but as humans, we also need other non-humans. We can't live without them.
It's almost like instrumental engagement. Is if we think of ourselves as an instrument or a
Yeah,
part
yeah.
of.
So it's that bringing in the sort of the bit of our vagus nerve, that eighth cranial nerve that comes out the back here and down here that goes into our lungs and our heart is the bit that actually regulates the body. which is actually, when you think about it, we've known for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years these heartfelt things. And in fact, Daniel Siegel, the first time I saw him, he was sort of does this whole thing about rubbing the heart, rubbing the belly, but particularly the heart. And you combine that with the breath and all the mindfulness stuff, which traditionally cultures have done, our body regulates. And we now know it's due to that it's stimulating the ventral vagus part of our vagus nerve, which helps then resonate with the dorsal vagus, because the dorsal vagus is the freeze bit, the dissociation, and that's when we start getting diabetes and all the other sort of ailments that are associated with high stress world. And then we've got the activated part of our system, which is the fight flight, traditionally, the sympathetic. But it's then how does the brain interact with all of that? Particularly when you look at Panksepp's world and all the research he did into the limbic system. He's along with hundreds and hundreds of other neurobiologists, but he put it together in his theories around looking at our mammalian brain, our emotional center, and these 7 systems, and it's how they interact with the rest. So we've got the care system, the lust system, the seeking system, the rage system, the fear system, and my brain's now stopped working. What are the other 2? It'll come in. Anyway, and it's looking at how our limbic system really does key into that, and how can it get us up into the frontal lobes so we can think about feelings and then get back down into the ventral vagus. Given that, 80% of the stuff coming up into our heads is from our bodies, just 20% goes back down to the bodies. So there's the afferent system. So there's our whole sensory nervous system that's interacting with it all at once, which is interacting with the environment. So all of that's coming in. So it's looking at how do we work with all of those different systems, putting them together, and working with the pain that a lot of us suffer from. This emotional pain that's actually physical pain, which it's just interesting. I've just been listening to Jon Cree, who's done all the work on hand holding and how important hand holding is for both regulating our bodies and others' bodies, but also for actually bringing down the receptiveness of the pain centers in the brain, particularly the dorsal anterior cingulate, if we get into that. Just fascinating stuff. He's been doing this since 2012, but some recent research just come out last week that's just showing it's not just this resonance stuff that happens between 2 humans when we're holding hands with somebody who we have a strong relationship with, be it a teacher, parent, partner, but also suppresses the pain in our systems. So it's just incredible. These advances in neurobiology that are just, I guess, advocating for what we're talking about, this just stronger resonance between humans and the non-human.
In a way, it's advocating for a lot of what Indigenous cultures, without romanticizing Indigenous cultures, because there's all kinds of things that's gone on all over the place in all cultures, but it's advocating a return to what our bodies have known.
Yeah.
Have known.
But now the neurobiology and the energetics of the body that we're showing through this much more holistic science, this system science, if you like, we can embody it and learn about that at the same time. So when you describe, particularly to the youngsters I've worked with, when they've actually found out about the autonomic nervous system and what's happening in their brains, suddenly, oh my God, that's what's going on when I'm feeling.
Yes. I know, to give someone that knowledge, because I mean, a lot of what we speak about in Grow Free and through my own experience is that there's a significant amount of shame gets caught up with a lot of these unconscious reactions, and part of that is because a flavor of some of those automatic reactions is shame. When it gets trapped in, that there's
Yeah,
a toxic biological underpinning to the experience of shame, and finding that
yeah,
out, recognizing and being able to kind of step aside a little bit and not just be at the mercy of the biology, but observe it and get to know it and be like, oh, right, that's you, that's that part of me, you're that system, or you're that experience, or you're
yeah,
um
yeah. And that's the mindfulness piece, isn't it? Oh, I'm just observing this. That's what that is,
mhm.
without having to then dig in to over identifying with it and thinking, well, no, it's because and now I know it's been passed down epigenetically, so it's my dad and my grandfather and all the rest of it.
Yes,
But just, ah, that's that.
that's that. And to have never had
Now,
an experience in this body other than that makes
mm,
makes it like the stories that it told you, like the shame that arose out that I then became to recognize came from my dad's mum, or prior to that, that I just always carried inside. So of course I can't show you any of this stuff. Um,
yeah,
and then having that space, yeah, and even because a lot of the like the past life stuff, in my healing journey, there was times where people were speaking about past life regression, and going back and clearing up some of this, and it just felt that little bit out of reach for me, or out of
mm,
beyond what my rational mind could believe, or whatever. But for me, having the science label and um advocate for some of this stuff has really added in
yeah,
a
yeah. And
layer.
then being able to weave that into metaphor for me that's when it becomes alive, when you can story it yourself, having that basic understanding of, yeah, the energy and what's going on in my nervous system, but then to know, that's what Prometheus was all about, for example, which happened a couple of years ago. It was just random fire telling the Prometheus story, how fire came to be, and then this lad suddenly, shit, that's the fire in my belly, isn't it? And it that and then he then identified Zeus as his father, but it was fine because it was a metaphor that was out there, and and it all came from um, picking sweet cicely and the pith inside. Because if you know the Prometheus story, he took my brain stopped working again. The wild plant that's got pith, and that's how he stole the fire off Zeus and all of that stuff. But it was, and that pith inside for me was just, he suddenly got, so the vagus nerve in my spine, it goes down the spine and so it's like the pith in the fire, isn't it? I said, well, yeah, in some ways, that's your story.
Yeah.
um, so it's sort of using those old stories that are actually telling us about our own internal biology.
Well, yeah, all the myths are really coming to life now, aren't they? They're really, all these,
Yeah,
like the wisdom in myths, for many of
yeah,
them. I'm like, all right, aha.
yeah.
Any stories or comments or questions from anyone listening? Please pop anything down if you had any similar experiences in the woods with anyone, or if anything's coming to mind, either tell us about them or pop them into the chat. There's one comment here. Or Heidi's saying that her colleague's going to love the workshop. He uses the old stories in his practice all the time. There is just so much wisdom, isn't there? And I think the more for me, the more I start to reconnect with my body and with nature, the more it becomes obvious where the stories came from and how they came from direct experience, and how metaphor and story gets created.
And then I think it's being out there and the groups you're working with their own stories, having been stimulated by these very traditional stories that, is the hero's journey a hero's journey? And it's just almost it's asking those right questions with the stories to stimulate a further exploration.
Yeah, that's definitely something I'm interested in at the moment, is creating our new stories, creating stories from here forward, taking the wisdom from the stories that are around already, and creating something new. If I mention another couple of one more comment before we do. Heidi says, I learned recently on a training about how metaphor engages both sides of the brain, so it's really useful in a therapeutic environment. Yeah, because that will be then helping integrate and connect.
And particularly if you're moving, I do quite a lot of walking and talking to share stories, and that whole walking alongside again, it's that by thing that's happening in your brain as you're moving. So there's something about moving with stories that's particularly out there. It's quite a powerful thing.
Well, yeah, moving, and Heidi says rhythm, and when we come back to this idea of even Dan Siegel just rubbing his heart, like this, so many of these solutions that help us to regulate are so simple, aren't they? Literally walking. Bruce Perry says rhythm is essential for regulating a highly anxious state.
Yeah.
You said walking alongside there, which brings in another couple of the phrases where you speak about we've probably covered a fair amount of this already. So let's just see, I'll read them out. You say we'll explore relational attunement and how it helps to refocus attention and rediscover delight in the energy of life. And you said we'll explore accompaniment. How we walk alongside each other and the more than human. What are the qualities of compassion, and how, in a society that values power over, do we foster connection with all the members of a learning community, or all the members of a community, working with our own warmth and acceptance of self, which will support educators or practitioners working with others through painful times. So there's a few comments come in, which I'll
I was just looking at Dawn's crying emoji that just came up there.
what just like she said, just like in the womb, rocking in our womb, our first experience of rhythm and mother's heartbeat. And heartbeat, womb meet, heartbeat. So, well, thinking about mothers and walking alongside, I mean, becoming a mother has been a super important part of my journey of reconnecting and integrating and refinding and exploring myself, and noticing some of the habitual ways of behaving with my daughter that I've taken on from my mum, and looking at it and and questioning, well, what is this relationship? Where do I stand as a mother in relation to my daughter? And when you speak about accompaniment, as any kind of practitioner or parent or human being, relational attunement how it helps to refocus attention, accompaniment, how we walk alongside each other, and the more than human. I wonder whether
So,
you could maybe
go
speak a
on.
little bit about what you mean, or even like give us a taste of any exercises you do in some of your work that's that
So
tap
with
into this.
the accompaniment, I think that a key part of all of this is curiosity, and actually genuine curiosity, authentic curiosity in the other.
A prerequisite
So
of
if
which is to
I,
feel safe. In order to feel
yeah,
curious, we need to feel
completely. I
safe.
think you have to feel safe. So one little exercise that I've done a lot, particularly with teenagers and adults, is when we've got to know each other, is going off in pairs and sitting side by side in a tree and just getting into that mindful state. And then one person starts talking about what they see. And they just start talking. The other's role, the only other role is to stop them at some point and say, okay, I'm interested in that. So what do you see? So they might have said, I see tree, I swing in a lot and it's quite special to me. And then they may say, oh, okay, so what do you see? And they just extend that, what do you see? And it's all highly timed. And then we may swap. And the other person then starts talking about their relationship to that place or what memories it brings. And the other person, and it is very much just that active listening and being really curious about what might be significant for the other person, but all they say is, what do you see?
Mm.
That's just one example of quite
It's
a
so
simple
simple but
but
really
very powerful
powerful.
exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and as you say, that sort of thing, you'll only get to that place where you're feeling safe and you've built that relationship. And if we've got, and we've got quite a few forest school type provisions or people working in those provisions here. That's the joy of that. Is we can be working long term. Um,
Within a
and
pedagogy
playing,
that
and it
allows
is
that
that
space.
allows that is playful as well. I just think that the curiosity is, or play is all about curiosity for me. So I love that you sort of started the whole evening tonight with that whole playful
Mm.
thing with the grow free community, and that's where the non-judgment comes in. Um, being allowed to play with things in whatever way you want.
I
And
think
yet you're
this
still part of the community. And that's always the line, isn't it? How much autonomy do we have within this community because we are still part of this community in terms of that? How far do I take the play?
that's interesting and brings me on to the sort of maybe perhaps the final couple of phrases. I'm just keeping an eye on time.
Yeah.
For one of the workshops that we're calling Involving All and Evolving Play, a couple of the phrases that come up from that was, how do we create what people said? We asked some practitioners and parents what if you could have Jon Cree up here for a day, what would you like to ask him, um, or what would you like to cover? And this idea of the balance of consent and self-direction
Hmm.
and structure. How do we create that balance? Um, I think that's it. I'll stick with that one because that's what you came on with there.
Yeah.
And
So again, this for me is about it. Part of it's about creating a safe container and safe boundaries that are agreed within a group. and the ability to honestly say my true yes, my true no, and my true maybe, and being
Yeah.
able to accept that within a community when you're looking at consent-based
Yeah. True yes.
education.
True
And then
no.
there is some sort of, and there's sort of, for me to in creating that safe container, there's something about structure and ritual within that communities develop. Um, so if you take the little community wood that I work in, um, a couple of days a week, so I'm there with the volunteers, the adult volunteers, and they're a real mixture. So yesterday, this is right in the heart of the city of Worcester. There was about 10 of us there yesterday, but we always have this little the part of the holding, and this is where the structure is fairly loose, but we always have a holding circle, checking in with each other, getting people to think about where their energy levels at and what sort of things they want to do, and then so it always starts with a cup of tea. We always have a shared lunch. And we normally have some sort of closing. So that's a fairly common structure, I think, in many. And I always think that shared food thing is so pretty fundamental, particularly around the fire. And if you go to our Saturday Forest School sessions, which we have a group in the morning, group in the afternoon, that's sort of changing. It's always a very quick 5-minute check-in, but and we have the reminder about remembering to get permission from each other, and it's always there's a sort of some puppets we use, which is the yes, no, maybe thing. And yeah, so that's just a flavor of that. Obviously, it's a lot more, but I think it's back to that safe container and how do we create the boundaries in which we can explore the yes, the no, and the maybe.
Yeah. And it's not rocket science, but it does
No,
require us. It requires us as parents or practitioners to be able to know our own yes, our own no, our own maybe, and to be able to
yeah,
express them. And for me, like, I know that's been super hard journey that I'm still finding the ability to express. I'm much clearer on what is my authentic yes and no,
mm,
and being able to then express that either with my daughter or with others or in a group, or and not to have that internal kind of fog or buzz going on. So
yeah,
my feeling is we are definitely in a kind of transition phase where our systems, I almost said our systems need to change. There's there's a it feels to me like our systems need to change, at least if I phrase it like that. um that's not going to happen in one quick
no,
move, that
no,
but
it takes
that
time.
us
Yeah,
as the adults who are working in those systems are doing the inner work to then change, uh, to let that come externally.
yeah.
I might be losing the power of my speech here as well. It's after 9 o'clock, ladies and
It is
gentlemen,
after 9 o'clock and it's Tuesday.
on a Tuesday. Are Does anyone have a comment or a question that they'd like to come in? Wave a hand, or pop the virtual hand raise thing up. It would be lovely to hear a couple of voices before we close. Even if there was any part that
Heidi's got one.
yeah. Well, I was going to ask Heidi to unmute, but oh, you're unmuted. Go on, Heidi.
Yeah, just about the safety before curiosity. It's really just a comment on that. Yes, it's vital for everybody. It's not just the children, and the practitioners need to be feeling safe too. And yeah, I've got an interesting case at the moment that I'm really looking forward to speaking about confidentially when it comes to the workshops, because I have questions, and I need to do some unpicking as to what's going on, because it's not happening the way I would expect. The complex person,
and a difficulty for you to feel curious in that.
Yeah, when there are sticks flying past my head at any given moment. And it's we're about 24 weeks in now, and there's still sticks flying past my head.
Flying past your head. Yeah.
Why is our relationship not moving forwards? And I think I'm sensing a lack of empathy, which is triggering me. So I'm constantly looking in and trying to pick apart what's going on for me as well as for them.
Yeah,
it's a tricky dynamic, which is very rare, I find, because maybe the kids I work with are not as complex as this one usually, so I'm having to go a bit deeper and as well.
Yeah, so it is. When you've got complex needs that you're having an eye on, sometimes it is hard, really hard, and that's where I think working in a team helps. But then if you've got complex needs within the team as well, so we've had, where I'm working at the moment, there's definitely been some dynamics that have had to be worked through, and having an eye on the needs. But I think if we can agree these common sets of values, which might be around, well, this is going to be a consent-based approach, we're halfway there if we can sort those shared values out, which the needs all feed into.
It's making me think of another situation I've heard about recently where there's the possibility of a person being excluded. And that's the language still around a situation, a person being excluded from a situation or a provision. And that actually maybe if we recognize that a team approach, or it takes a community for anyone to fit, to support a child, or for any adult or any child, we need a community. One person isn't going to be the be all and the end all. If we can create situations where there's choice and flexibility without it becoming exclusionary, I don't think inclusion needs to mean everyone is supposed to fit in any one environment, but that there are various niches and environments created within our culture that can accommodate all of us.
Yeah.
Maybe. Any other
Which
thoughts?
is where we have an advantage when we're working in woods, because there's so many different niches that we can tap into, even in a little acre and 3/4 right in the heart of the city. It's just interesting just watching all the group dynamics that happen both with the adult groups and the children groups, and how they gravitate to different spaces and different places and different things. And that's where having a whole team of facilitators that can really hold that is key. And then when you're working with individuals like the ones that we're working with, which are really complex, it's that wider working with carers, social services, ed psychs, all of that. And it does get complex. And it takes more than one person, which is where I just think this fit within the collaborative community. That's another Darwin thing. It's not this sort of dog eat dog thing that he was into. Mycorrhizal connections. And okay, Suzanne Sinard came along and she's done all of that, but he showed all those symbiotic relationships that were happening. So this interpretation of our culture that took the survival of the fittest, and that's the way it's going to be, and ignored most of what Darwin was saying in terms of the complex interrelationships and intra-relationships between all of this. Yeah. So it does take, like you say, a whole village. It's sort of, how do we get to that point? And it can be really frustrating. So I just definitely hear you there, Heidi. And there will be, I had the same, the odd individuals where actually this just is not clicking at all. I've done everything I can. And there comes a point where you have to say, well, maybe we need to find some other provision if it's just not working.
And there may not be other provision.
And that's where your boundary comes in. I know, but it's where we have to stick to our own boundaries in some way and try our damnedest. I mean, the last thing you want to do is exclude. We never.
Yeah, it's definitely not anywhere near that. I'm just a little. I'm still. I'm still curious. But in the session, sometimes I'm losing my curiosity because I'm not safe.
Right.
That, I think that's. But when I get home, I'm all curious again.
Yeah. In the safety of home. And I think that's, Dawn's put a comment in and how it can be absolutely heartbreaking for all where currently things come to the case of, or the decision to exclude. And that I feel like that's a big part of where we are being asked to create a new world, new communities that no longer mean there's a mainstream that we can be excluded from, but that there are various spaces with various boundaries, because no one person is going to trigger everyone.
No.
And while we're doing an awful lot of collective healing, there are some big feelings that need to come up from a lot of people before we get to a place where we're all much more masterful at regulating and co-regulating. And are there any final questions or comments before we close the conversation? I feel it looks like there's some typing going on. But,
sorry, I'll just speak. I'm typing, but it's taking too long. I think talking about systems and exclusion and it's so difficult because we know how important that sense of belonging is for us all, and how vital that is for us, mentally, physically, in every single way. And yet the systems that we as a species have designed are very exclusive in a lot of ways. Accessing them can be really, really hard. Maintaining them can be really, really hard. And so, and I think that's the most heartbreaking thing, is finding those placements for people who maybe have been excluded from a service, and where they go, so that's just a kind of a side note, is that, we are seeing more and more alternatives coming, but I just want it to go faster. I just want there to be far more alternatives, especially in rural areas, or areas which are not so highly populated. There seems to be less choice, in my experience anyway.
I had an interesting conversation with my sister who works in more in health and social care in settings, and like we were just discussing how in those scenarios, and Leighton, you probably have experienced this, there's been a bigger call to be reflective and to shift practice than perhaps there has been in our education systems, and probably because by the time people are involved or accessing a lot of the health and social care systems, it's gotten to real crisis points already. And so it's like, right, we really have to change some of this, but perhaps it's not been so obvious or so recognized that a lot of the patterns that lead somebody or us all there eventually start in those early years and in education, and we're maybe more forgiving, or someone's feels less dangerous when they're still small, and we can manage them.
Yeah. Well, the hope is, I think after COVID, when you look at the boom in, and I'm assuming this has happened in Scotland, the boom in home education, the boom that, and there is more and more alternatives. There's more and more schools looking for a blended approach. Look, it's no good for them to be with us 5 days a week, and we're getting more and more of that. So you do think, and I know it's hard to think, it's not being quick enough, is it? As Dawn's just said. But I think we are on this upward trend. There's just something rumbling.
Well, that I feel, ladies and gentlemen, is an amazing place to start to finish. I'm going to read George's comment in a wee minute, but in the conversations I've had with you previously, Jon, I've not heard you quite so positive and upbeat about the change in the system as you just expressed then. So I'm like, wow, if you're seeing it, if you're seeing the shift, then I'm taking that as a big sign that something's going on. Georgia says, just to thank you in closing for sharing your experience and knowledge. So much of the value of this process is the experiential, which takes us beyond only the academic side.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Totally.
And thank you to everyone for coming along.
Georgia.
It's so lovely to have the chance to connect prior to our workshops in May. And just so that you know, within the workshop space online, when you've signed up, you get access into a wee space that I'll drip some more content and stuff in there, so that we build up and that we arrive in the workshops and have our day or days in the woods as connected and prepared and kind of knowing each other as we can. So,
and as experiential as possible.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right, so big thank you to everyone, and we'll say goodbye there.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Looking forward to being up there again.
All right, won't be long now.
Back to Aberdeen, back in May. Yeah.
Bye. Bye to everyone. If you want to come in and just say bye, your voice will be etched forever into the recording.
And a big thanks, Emma.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Night.